Jesse.
Hey,
Bruce Navarro.
Hey, question.
Pleasure to meet you. We're working with Quanta Group and talking to you guys. I wanted to just say hi. Good luck today. Enjoy it.
Thank you.
Have you done this before?
I have not. Have you?
Small UAV Coalition.
Kind of like still
learning
experience.
Chelsea
Yeah.
with Airware.
I didn't know you guys were all together. There's Mike. You know.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, Chelsea, Airware. Good to meet you.
Hey, I'm Michael Drowak with Small UAV Coalition. Michael, nice to meet you.
Michael, let me.
Did you see Buddy Machini much?
Yeah. He's our CTO, so
Give him my regards.
all right. He was in House Lab, right? I think yeah.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Be
Well,
well.
so I guess when he was there, were you on sabbatical at that point?
No, he defended about 6 months after I left.
Okay.
So I was on his committee, and in fact, I think he took my class when he was an undergrad. So we overlapped a fair bit.
Okay.
Can't quite remember.
Did you know our CEO Jonathan? Because
I
he
didn't.
didn't do graduate work there.
No,
So, yeah.
yeah. Oh, I thought he did a master's also with Hal. No?
He just did undergrad.
He was in the ACL.
Yeah.
So he must have done undergrad.
He did undergrad research, and he did one of the I think it was the design build fly.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I met Jonathan, I want to say June of this year. He came by when I was still at Google.
Okay.
And did you guys hire Brett Bedke?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad that worked out.
You knew him really well too. Yeah.
Yeah, he also, I tried to recruit him as a grad student, as I did with Buddy for that matter.
Yeah.
Lost them both to John.
Yeah, he came through Buddy like he was, I think, a good friend of Buddy's.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny how much we've pulled from the MIT and Georgia Tech aerospace schools.
It's not a surprise.
Yeah.
You know, they're both excellent programs. We got a couple of good people from Caltech as well.
Okay.
Especially in people who are good with the mechanics. Not so much the software side,
Yeah.
but understand how to build things.
Yeah. You said you're heading out tonight, or
Yeah.
okay? So
I have a 4:30 flight to Montreal.
really quick. Wow.
Yes. Story of my life.
Yeah. When did your sabbatical end?
August. You said effectively September 1.
Okay. So it's still pretty recent.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah. Hey, pleasure to meet you. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you're here.
Excuse me, are you Dr. Roy? Hi, I'm Peggy Gilligan from FAA.
So
Nice to see you. Have you done this before?
I have not.
Huh?
But my colleague John.
Yeah, we
done
did.
this many times.
Yes, he has.
sorry.
I've been with him many times.
So I got his.
Hey, how you doing? I'm
counsel.
Michael Drowak.
Oh, good.
Hey,
And have you done this before?
I have not.
Well, I hope they direct all the questions to you guys then. Give you that fine opportunity.
Yeah.
I've had more
I'm
than my
Michael
chance.
Drowak with Small UAV Coalition.
Oh, hi, nice to meet you. Peggy Gilligan, how are you?
When I was at the FAA, I supported a couple of things where I provided documents and statements and back and that kind of stuff.
So, it's a bit of an experience. So, I'm apparently on C-SPAN. So, yeah, made it big time. So that means you're in a hotel some night at 3 in the morning and can't sleep. You'll find yourself. It's really quite astonishing.
What can I put
You
on
turn it
there?
on, you're like, oh my God, I know that person.
Yeah.
So, and then last round it's over. That's what I live for. No, I think it'll be interesting though. I think I'm glad that we'll get some folks with a little bit different perspectives. On the discussion.
How you doing?
Nice to meet both of you.
Nice to meet you.
It's tough getting to exactly 5 minutes. It's like there's so many things you want to say, and
That's right.
it's so tough.
I've clocked myself, and I'm at I vary between 4:59 and 5:10.
I was 4:54 and 4:59. I was like, all right.
And then we'll, Oh, really?
No, it's not. Yeah, we don't want my ringtone going on.
literally
my
make
ringtone is
myself
Tyler
throw
to the
himself on the
News
floor.
and they
Yeah. Trust me, don't worry. Okay. I'll just say start the most.
What's the concern with the phone?
No, there's no
Just
concern.
turning it off.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Good morning. Committee will come to order. I'd like to ask unanimous consent that members not on the committee, in addition to members not on the subcommittee, be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing. There's a great deal of interest, and offer testimony and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. I'd like to thank all of you for being here. The United States has been the global leader in aviation. We're all very proud of that. And American leadership in aerospace, manufacturing, air transportation, flight safety, and technological innovation is tremendous. The aviation industry contributes billions of dollars to our economy, supports millions of jobs throughout our country, and is a source of pride for all Americans. Unmanned aerial systems, or UAS, have been increasingly in the news. But they're not truly new. It's been almost 100 years since the U.S. military began developing the first UAS. Like other new technologies, UAS offers both exciting opportunities and daunting challenges. The previous FAA reauthorization law contained provisions directing the FAA to take steps towards safely integrating UAS into our nation's airspace by September 2015. Among other things, we directed the FAA to create test sites and regulations for UAS. The results so far appear to be mixed, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on the FAA's efforts. There are many issues surrounding UAS we need to consider. First and foremost, and has always been, safety. Our nation's safety record is the result of decades of hard work by thousands and also some hard lessons learned. Safety is the cornerstone of U.S. aviation industry, and without it, the UAS industry cannot succeed, period. Thus, I am very concerned when I read in the Washington Post that the FAA is receiving about 25 reports each month from pilots about UAS flying too close to their aircraft, sometimes even near major airports. Protecting privacy is equally important as we further integrate and deploy UAS, whether by individual hobbyists or in commercial applications. I know the FAA and aviation industry are taking the issue very seriously, and Congress will continue to be actively engaged. We can all agree that UAS represents a tremendous economic opportunity. The FAA estimates that 89 to 90 billion will be invested globally in UAS over the next 10 years. And major U.S. companies have begun investing in UAS technology in a major way. There are many valuable applications in real estate, agriculture, medical transport, and infrastructure maintenance, with many more on the horizon. It's not hard to imagine UAS making existing industries more efficient and giving rise to entirely new ones. All of this could mean new jobs and vast economic opportunities for the American people if we do this right. So it also concerns me when I read in the Wall Street Journal about major U.S. companies taking their UAS research and development activities to foreign countries, such as Canada and Australia, because FAA regulations are too burdensome and too slow. It also concerns me that the road builders in Germany and farmers in France today are enjoying economic benefits from UAS because safety regulators there have found ways to permit such flights. I can't help but wonder that if the Germans, the French, and the Canadians do some of these things today, then why can't we also be doing them? Are they smarter than us? I don't think so. Are they better than us? I don't think so. So we really need these questions answered. I hope to get a better understanding of this issue during today's hearing. As I said earlier, safety is paramount and the challenges are difficult. But if there is a country that is up to the challenge of safe UAS integration, it is certainly the United States of America. We have the very best engineers, the smartest inventors, the most creative minds, and the knowledgeable regulators to ensure American leadership in aviation in the decades ahead. I know this because many of our best and brightest minds in aviation work at the FAA's Technical Center flagship, which is in my district. The FAA Tech Center is a one-stop shop for the best and brightest to research, develop, demonstrate, and validate new aviation technologies and data sources. It has had a role in many advances in flight safety, including air traffic control, which is key to safe UAS integration. It's a place where new ideas are developed and old ones are improved. Work on UAS is underway there already, and I fully expect their contributions will continue and they will be invaluable. I'm interested in hearing today where we are in terms of the UAS industry and what lies ahead, what progress the government has or hasn't made, and what industry and FAA need, and how we in Congress can help as we consider the next FAA reauthorization bill. And I've talked with Mr. Larson and members of the committee and Chairman Schuster. We're really looking at this very closely because as we prepare the next FAA authorization bill, we're going to be looking for substantial improvements and advancements in this particular area, and we'll be looking at specific language if necessary if we don't see these advances in a timely way. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on these topics and thank them for joining us today. Before I recognize my colleague, Mr. Larson, for his comments, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material for the record for this hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I'd now like to yield to Mr. Larson for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Lobiando, for calling today's hearing on U.S. unmanned aircraft systems integration, oversight, and competitiveness. I appreciate you holding this hearing at my request, and safety is and must be the FAA's #1 priority. Certainly is mine. I know it's yours as well. We've looked at unmanned aircraft systems, or UAS, twice earlier this year, but last week's report of numerous near collisions between UAS and manned aircraft are a stark reminder that the FAA must be prepared to ensure UAS operations are safe, both for those in the air and people on the ground, so this hearing is timely. The UAS industry has great potential to drive economic growth and create jobs, including in Washington State, where I'm from, which is an epicenter of aviation R&D. However, there's no doubt there are some near-term challenges. For example, the FAA says it receives about 25 reports each month from pilots who have seen unmanned aircraft or model aircraft operating near their aircraft, including some near collisions. But we rise to challenges. We do not shrink from them. And I want you to consider these headlines with cautionary tales. Planes crash in air, man killed. That's from the Wyoming State Tribune. 2 killed when they crash in air, Trenton Evening Times. Crash in air kills 2, pilots die when 2 machines collide in practice flight. That's the Oregonian. All these headlines are from 1917, 1917, and 1920. I found more than 80 stories of this kind alone, all written before 1921. These reports could have caused the American public to give on developing things that fly, what they used to call machines, now we call airplanes. But we didn't. Had we given up on commercial air travel then, we would not have the safe and efficient passenger airline system that we have today. So while our near collision headlines reflect undeniable challenges that must be addressed, we have to keep moving forward to ensure progress and competitiveness. But let's be clear, integration of UAS must never come at the expense of safety. So to help guide this effort, the last authorization set forth specific requirements and milestones for the FAA to safely integrate UAS into the national airspace. We've heard a number of concerns from industry that the FAA is not moving quickly enough. The Department of Transportation Inspector General reported in June that FAA had completed work toward 9 of the milestones in the Act, but that the agency was behind schedule on remaining milestones. The bill required the FAA to publish a rule on small UAS by August 14th of this year. We expect that rule soon. The bill also required the FAA to establish 6 test ranges for UAS research. However, while those test ranges are up and running, we continue to hear from stakeholders that those test ranges are not being utilized as much as they can be. However, given the magnitude of the safety implications of incorporating this technology into our sophisticated and crowded airspace, we have to give credit where credit is due, and the FAA is proceeding with caution and is making some progress. For example, Section 333 of the Act gave the FAA authority to authorize certain UAS operations on an interim basis in advance of the final rule on small UAS. The FAA has just begun using this authority and has granted several exemptions, including some this morning. We must ensure, though, that the agency allows prudent testing and operations to begin safely, even if on a limited basis. We've also heard concerns from other countries that other countries afford more flexible environments to test and operate UAS. So while we must hold safety paramount, we do not want to fall needlessly behind. Privacy is another major concern that must be addressed, and I share the public's concern about implications of aerial surveillance from UAS operators and work to ensure that these concerns are addressed through proper channels. Within the past 2 years, we've seen the FAA make progress on implementing next-gen capabilities with the strong bipartisan support of the subcommittee under the leadership of Chairman Lobiando. Our work on next-gen shows us the absolute necessity of FAA's collaboration with stakeholders, especially pilots and air traffic controllers, who will be directly affected by new technologies. Our goal with regard to UAS integration should be to keep safe integration on track so that we're not here in 2024 talking about a plan to integrate UAS into the airspace. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to ask unanimous consent to enter written remarks from MITRE into the record. MITRE is engaged in research and development for the FAA, and its input is critical as we look towards reauthorization.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to hearing from all our panelists about why we're here today, and what we can do to keep the integration of UAS on track and to ensure safety. Thank you.
We're very pleased to welcome Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Bill Schuster, and thank him for his tremendous interest and involvement in this issue and the FAA authorization bill. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to start off by saying welcome to our panelists here today. We're interested in hearing your testimony and your views on this issue. But I share Mr. Lobiando's views on safety. Safety is in our skies is simply paramount. That has to be first and foremost to us. So we in Congress are very interested in the UAS. In the last FAA bill, we directed the FAA to safely integrate that into our airspace by September 2015. But the UAS industry cannot develop unless it's proven safe. And based on the opening statements by the chairman and the ranking member, Republicans and Democrats are united in our views about the priority and importance of safety. We also understand that UAS are an exciting technology with the potential to transform parts of our economy. I'm intrigued by how UAS might improve our modes of transportation. For example, the UAS might be used for certain kind of bridge inspections without closing lanes or traffic stopping or requiring workers to have to climb up to high places to do the inspection. And the UAS, I'm told, can survey 180 acres of land in less than an hour during construction projects. UAS can safely help us get more bang out of the taxpayer's buck on infrastructure projects. And with that in mind, it's our responsibility to look at this and take a close look at this technology. I know there's some challenges to get this right. I'm confident that American inventors, engineers, and entrepreneurs are up to the challenge to ensure the United States retains its lead in aviation technology. As we work towards safe integration of UAS, we cannot let a few irresponsible individuals jeopardize the safety of the many and set back a potentially promising technology. So I'm glad you're all here today, and thank you for holding this hearing, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schuster. I want to thank our distinguished panel of witnesses today. Our first panel will include Ms. Peggy Gilligan, Associate Administrator for Aviation Safety for the Federal Aviation Administration, essentially all things UAS. Mr. Matthew Hampton, Assistant Inspector General for Aviation Audits for the U.S. Department of Transportation, Office of the Inspector General. Dr. Gerald Dillingham, Director of Civil Aviation Issues for the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Captain Lee Moak, who is President of Airline Pilots Association. Mr. Jesse Kalman, Head of Business Development and Regulatory Affairs for Airware. Dr. Nicholas Roy, and Ms. Gilligan, you are recognized. We welcome your remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Lobiando, Congressman Larson, and Chairman Schuster for the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee to discuss unmanned aircraft systems, or what we know as UAS. In the FAA Modernization and Reform Act, Congress mandated the safe and efficient integration of UAS into the National Airspace System. Administrator Huerta, in announcing his strategic initiatives, identified integration of UAS and commercial space operations into the NAS as one of his top priorities, and we are working hard to meet those mandates. In the Act, Congress mandated that the Secretary of Transportation consult with government partners and industry stakeholders to develop a comprehensive plan and 5-year roadmap for UAS integration. Both documents have been published and outline the path ahead for UAS. As called for in the statute, these documents set out a phased approach that must be carried out thoughtfully to ensure safety is not compromised. Consistent with congressional direction, we announced 6 UAS sites to aid in UAS integration. As required, we set out to have 1 test site operational within 6 months of selection. We surpassed that goal with the first test site operational within 4 months and 3 more sites operational within 6 months of their selection. Now, all 6 UAS sites are fully operational and have established their research agendas. The data and information from the test sites will help answer key questions about how unmanned aircraft systems interface in the airspace as well as with air traffic control. The FAA Technical Center in Atlantic City is playing a key role in data collection and analysis and will continue to make significant contributions to UAS integration as we work closely with the test sites to identify the data that will be the most useful to the FAA. We are moving forward with UAS integration through rulemaking. As mandated by the Act, the FAA initiated rulemaking to permit civil operation of small UAS in the airspace. We all agree that that project is taking too long, but I'm pleased to say that we believe we now have a balanced proposal that is currently under executive review. In the meantime, and consistent with the Act, we're looking at activities that do not pose risk to others who operate in the airspace, to the general public, or to national security, and that can be operated safely without an airworthiness certificate. Once the Secretary of Transportation is able to make that determination, FAA then grants relief from other FAA operating regulations. We have authorized 11 operators, including 5 exemptions that we've issued today, to conduct commercial UAS activity in the national airspace, covering activities such as surveying, inspection, and movie making. We continue to facilitate the use of UAS by public entities. For more than 2 decades, FAA has authorized the use of unmanned aircraft for important safety missions such as firefighting and border security. Working closely with the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security and other agencies, we're taking advantage of the extensive federal investment that has been made in these systems. In addition, more than 35 law enforcement agencies now operate unmanned aircraft under certificates of authorization. And we are also working with law enforcement agencies to address the unauthorized use of UAS, for they are often in the best position to help us deter, detect, and investigate such activities. We're working hard to educate the public about the requirements for operating UAS in the national airspace, and we believe opportunities like this will help us in that endeavor. But that has proven to be a challenge. Unlike traditional manned aircraft, unmanned aircraft are widely available for purchase by individuals who may not realize that they are entering the national airspace system or that they must comply with FAA regulations. They may not appreciate the significant safety risk that is presented by unauthorized or unsafe UAS operations in the national airspace. Just as you directed in the 2012 Act, FAA can and will take enforcement action against anyone who operates a UAS in a way that endangers the safety of the national airspace. But we continue to lead with education because we believe the vast majority of UAS operators want to comply with FAA regulation. We remain committed to serve as world leaders in this segment of the aviation industry. The United States is proud to lead the remotely piloted aircraft systems panel recently formed by the International Civil Aviation Organization. The U.S. will be leading the way to establish standards and recommended practices, procedures, and guidance materials to facilitate the safe integration of remotely piloted aircraft systems around the world. Together with our international partners, we will facilitate integration at the international level while continuing to lead the world in aviation safety. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. I look forward to answering your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hampton.
Chairman Schuster, Chairman Lobiondo, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today on FAA efforts to integrate unmanned aircraft systems, or UAS, into the national airspace system. The increasing demand for UAS systems has enormous economic implications and competitive implications for our nation. As you know, the FAA Modernization and Reform Act was a catalyst for UAS technology. The Act directed FAA to take steps to advance UAS integration with the goal of safely integrating UAS technology by 2015. In June, we reported on FAA efforts and made 11 recommendations specifically aimed at helping FAA to more effectively meet the Act's goals. My testimony today will focus on FAA's progress in implementing the Act's provisions and the challenges the agency faces in safely integrating UAS technology. To date, FAA has completed more than half of the 17 UAS requirements in the Act. This includes selecting the test sites, as well as publishing a roadmap outlining agency plans. In addition, using the authority granted in the Act, FAA recently authorized 11 companies to operate UAS in commercial operations. However, FAA is behind schedule on the Act's remaining requirements, many of which are key to advancing UAS integration. For example, FAA missed the Act's August 2014 deadline for issuing a final rule on small UAS systems. These are systems weighing less than 55 pounds. While FAA expects to issue a proposed rule soon, it will likely generate a significant amount of public comment that the agency will need to consider before issuing a final rule. As a result, it is uncertain when a final rule will be published. Ultimately, FAA will not meet the Act's overarching goal to safely integrate UAS technology by September 2015. As FAA works to implement the Act's provisions, the agency also faces significant technological, regulatory, and management challenges. On the technological front, the evolution of detect and avoid technology is paramount. Also, the risk of lost link scenarios when an operator loses connectivity with an unmanned aircraft remains high. Furthermore, establishing secure radio frequency spectrum to support UAS communications has also proven difficult to address. FAA, DoD, and NASA has several important research projects underway, but it remains unclear when the technology will be robust enough to support safe UAS operations. Regulatory challenges have also affected progress to date. Although FAA has authorized limited UAS operations on a case-by-case basis, it is not yet positioned to certify civil UAS operations on a large scale. FAA has worked with a special advisory committee for more than 9 years, but has not yet reached consensus with stakeholders on minimum performance and design standards for UAS technology. Much work remains to set requirements for pilot and crew qualifications, ground control stations, and communication links for UAS systems. Finally, I'd like to turn to the management challenges and areas need that significant management attention. FAA lacks the training, tools, and procedures air traffic controllers need to manage UAS operations. FAA also lacks standard databases to collect and analyze safety data from current UAS operators and a severity-based classification for incident reporting. Data from FAA's UAS test sites will provide critical information related to certification, air traffic control, and detect-avoid technologies I discussed earlier. All of these can inform FAA's decisions and advance progress. Other important and much-needed steps include publication of the Small UAS Rule and developing an integrated budget document that clearly identifies funding requirements in the near and midterm. In conclusion, UAS will be and remain a front and center issue that requires significant management attention. It remains uncertain when and at what pace UAS technology can be fully and safely integrated into our airspace. Now is the time for FAA to build on the knowledge base to make informed decisions, set priorities, identify critical path issues, and develop the basic regulatory framework for integrating UAS technology into the national airspace system. We will continue to monitor FAA's progress on these issues and keep the subcommittee apprised of our efforts. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I'll be happy to answer any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hampton. That's, wow. Okay, we'll leave it at that for right now. Dr. Dillingham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Larson, Chairman Schuster, members of the subcommittee. My statement this morning is based on our ongoing work for this subcommittee and focuses on 3 areas. First, FAA's progress towards meeting the unmanned aerial systems provisions of the 2012 FAA Reauthorization Act. Second, key research and development activities needed to support unmanned systems integration. And third, how other countries have progressed towards integrating unmanned systems into their airspace. Regarding the provisions of the 2012 Act, the Act included 17 specific provisions for FAA to achieve safe unmanned systems integration by September 2015. While FAA has completed most of these provisions, key ones remain and additional actions are needed to effectively leverage the completed provisions for the integration effort. For example, A critical step for allowing commercial operations is the publication of a final rule. To develop the rule, FAA must publish a notice of proposed rulemaking. However, as you've heard, the NPRM has been significantly delayed. Given the time that it is generally required for rulemaking and the tens of thousands of comments expected on this NPRM, the consensus of opinion is that the integration of unmanned systems will likely slip from the mandated deadline of September 2015 until 2017 or even later. The delay in the final rule, which will establish operational and certification requirements, could contribute to unmanned systems continuing to operate unsafely and illegally and lead to additional enforcement activities for FAA's scarce resources. Additionally, without a small unmanned systems rule, U.S. businesses may continue to take their testing and research and development activities outside of the U.S. Regarding research and development activities, the key technology issues remain essentially the same as they have been since the beginning of the unmanned systems era, including detect and avoid, command and control, airworthiness, and spectrum issues. There are a wide range of stakeholders involved in addressing these issues, and there has been some notable progress, including the establishment of the test sites. However, in spite of the progress in research and development, the role of the 6 test sites remains unclear. The designation and operational startup of the 6 test sites were viewed by many as a major step forward in acquiring the necessary data to address the technological and operational challenges associated with integration. Our preliminary work suggests that this development has not lived up to its promise. The test site operators told us that they were significantly underutilized by FAA and the private sector, and that they were unclear as to what research and development and operational data was needed by FAA to support the integration initiatives. However, our preliminary work suggests that FAA has provided some guidance to the test sites regarding the needed research and development and data needs. FAA officials said that federal law prevents them from tasking the test sites for specific data. According to FAA, the law does not allow the agency to give directions to the site or accept voluntary services without payment. As we continue our study, we will be trying to better understand the relationship between the test sites, FAA, and the needed research and development, and how the test sites can achieve their highest and best use. Regarding developments in foreign countries, as is the case in the U.S., many countries around the world allow commercial operations under some restrictions. Also similar to the U.S., foreign countries are experiencing problems with illegal and unsafe unmanned systems operations. However, a 2014 MITRE study and our preliminary observations have revealed that several countries, including Japan, Australia, the United Kingdom, and Canada, have progressed further than the United States with regulations supporting commercial operations for small unmanned vehicles. But the regulations governing unmanned systems are not consistent worldwide. Some countries, such as Canada, are easing operating restrictions through a risk management approach, while other countries, such as India, are increasing unmanned systems restrictions. Our ongoing study for this subcommittee will look further at the experiences of other countries for potential lessons learned for the United States. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you, Dr. Dillingham. Captain Moak.
Thank you, Chairman Lobiando, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to provide our perspectives on the critical importance of safely integrating unmanned aircraft systems into the national airspace system. Our country's national airspace is the most dynamic and diverse on the planet, and also, I want to underscore this, the safest. We need to protect it and maintain it to deliver the safest, most efficient air transportation possible. UAS and remotely piloted aircraft systems include aircraft ranging in the size from a small bird to as large as an airliner. Some UAS aircraft are operated completely autonomously. Their flight route is computer programmed and the device operates without a pilot. Other UAS aircraft are flown remotely by pilots from an operational center or control stations that can be located at the launch and recovery site or perhaps thousands of miles away. ALPA supports the safe use of unmanned aircraft systems. We recognize the potential benefit to our nation's economic competitiveness, but we also recognize the potential for a safety risk if we don't treat them as what they are, airplanes in airspace. We have all seen photos of the damage that can be caused to an airplane by a bird strike in flight. Unmanned aircraft can be much smaller or much larger than birds, but they harbor added risk in that they carry batteries, motors, and other hard metal components. This was a bird strike. Please take a look at this on a commercial airplane and this next photo of a military airplane's encounter with an unmanned aerial vehicle headed in the wing route there. We must not allow pressure to rapidly integrate UAS into the NAS to rush a process that must be solely focused on safety. Standards and technologies must be in place to ensure the same high level of safety as currently present in the NAS before a UAS RPA can be authorized to occupy the same airspace as airliners are operating in areas where it might inadvertently stray into airspace used by commercial flights. We also need to make certain that UAS pilots are properly trained and understand the consequences of possible malfunctions. Now, I knew I would be speaking before you today, so I went online last Thursday and purchased this quadcopter for the committee for just a few $100s. I received it 2 days later, and as the marketing promised, it was ready to fly in a few minutes, and I was flying it in my office. Now, this UAS can carry a camera. It has a GPS, which with the purchase of additional software can be used to pre-program a flight plan. It has the capability, this one, to fly as high as 6,600 feet for 15 minutes, and that means it could easily end up in the same airspace I occupy when I'm on approach to land at Newark or at Seattle or at any other airport. Now, if we took this aircraft out in the courtyard building, it has the capability to fly from this courtyard to the final approach path at Reagan National Airport, and from the park at the end of the runway, that's Reagan Airport, that's at Gravely Park, you can see it would be even easier to fly right into the aircraft zone. Now, a well-trained and experienced flight crew is the most important safety component of the commercial air transportation system. A pilot in the cockpit of an aircraft can see, he can feel, he can smell, and he can hear indications of a problem and begin to formulate a course of action long before even the most sophisticated indicators verify trouble. Without a pilot on board, we lose this advantage, and as a result, it's essential that UAS pilots are highly trained, qualified, and monitored to meet the equivalent standards of pilots who operate manned aircraft. We also need to make certain that a UAS aircraft can't stray into areas where it poses a hazard if the operator loses control, that it behaves like it's supposed to, and if there's a failure, the aircraft doesn't endanger other aircraft or people on the ground. If UAS is intended to be operated in civil airspace or could unintentionally be flown into our airspace, airline pilots need to be able to see them on our cockpit displays, and controllers need the ability to see them on their radar scopes. UAS aircraft also need to be equipped with collision avoidance capability. And finally, the FAA resources are limited, and the agency must have a long-term sustained source of funding as well as realistic timelines and a systematic approach that builds the path of UAS integration based on safety. We appreciate the opportunity to testify today. We look forward to working with Congress to ensure that safety is held paramount in bringing UAS into the national airspace.
Thank you, Captain Moak. Mr. Kalman.
Chairman Lobiando, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify here today. I am the head of business development and regulatory affairs for Airware, a San Francisco-based company developing flight control systems for commercial unmanned aircraft, enabling companies to use commercial UAVs to collect, analyze, and disseminate data for a growing number of commercial applications around the world. Airware has raised over $40 million from several of the world's leading venture capital firms, and our team has more than doubled over the last year. I also serve on the board of the Small UAV Coalition, which was formed earlier this year to promote safe commercial operations of small UAVs here in the United States. This is a critical time for the UAV industry and airware. The Small UAV Coalition and others in the community would like to ensure that the United States becomes the global leader for commercial UAV technology development and operations while maintaining the safest airspace in the world. Today, I will focus on 3 key issues for this subcommittee. 1, the current state of UAV technology and potential implications in a variety of industries. 2, the need for a risk-based approach to UAV regulations. 3rd, the effect of current and expected regulations on U.S. businesses. First, the UAV industry is one of the fastest growing markets here in the United States. Many here today may be familiar with the small consumer UAVs used for personal enjoyment or photography. But I would like to focus on the commercial-grade UAVs, which are tackling some of the biggest problems across a variety of industries. Commercial UAVs are being used for disaster management, oil and gas exploration, search and rescue, inspection of wind turbines, and surveying of crops. These UAVs are equipped with many technological features to ensure safety and reliability of operations, such as geofencing systems, which keep a UAV within certain altitude and distance limits, as well as away from sensitive areas. Also, contingency management systems, which in the case of an issue on board the aircraft, enable the UAV to automatically return to a safe landing location. These types of technologies are developing at an increasingly rapid rate and are enabling safe operations around the world today. In addition, NASA is also working to develop a UAS traffic management system to provide a means for safely managing a lot of these small systems. Through my past experience working at the FAA, I understand the challenge in regulating this new and revolutionary technology in the United States. There are steps we can be taking to begin to open up operational environments now. Most commercial UAV operations will take place below 400 feet, 100 feet below the typical minimum safe altitude of 500 feet for manned aviation. This brings me to my second point. We must take a new, risk-based approach to regulating UAVs. For example, a very small aircraft operating over a remote farm field at 300 feet would be subject to minimal regulatory requirements, whereas a larger aircraft operating over populated areas would require highly reliable avionics, additional training, geofence technology, and fail-safe mechanisms like a parachute. These are the types of risk models being used to allow commercial operations in Europe today, including France. I am pleased that the FAA recently stated its intentions to shift to this type of model. I applaud them for this, but the critical question is, how quickly can it be implemented? Finally, I'd like to discuss the effect of delayed regulations on U.S. businesses. As I mentioned, France allows low-risk commercial applications, as does Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and many other countries. The United States, typically a leader in aviation, is one of only a few countries that currently prohibits commercial UAV operations, except pursuant to an exemption. While we wait, small and large businesses in the United States are moving UAV testing and operations abroad, where regulations are more advanced. Delayed and overly restrictive regulations aren't just slowing the growth of the UAV industry. Many of the largest industries and corporations in America see this technology as key for remaining competitive in the global marketplace. Airware has raised a strategic investment from one of the largest corporations in America, General Electric, who could use UAVs across many of their different business units. The Farm Bureau has also recently noted that U.S. farmers will not be able to keep up with foreign competitors if they are not allowed to use the same technology. UAV technology will have a major impact on our economy. In the first 3 years of integration, conservative estimates include creating more than 70,000 jobs and adding $13.6 billion into the economy. With each year of integration delays, the U.S. loses more than $10 billion in potential economic impact. We want the jobs, economic benefits, and core intellectual property created from this work to be here in the United States. We know that no matter the outcome today, UAV technology will create jobs. It will save lives, and it will grow the economies of those countries with the foresight to act. The United States is poised to lead the way for this growing and game-changing industry. We have the talent and the workforce to create the technology needed to safely integrate into the world's most complex airspace. Let's act quickly before major opportunities are lost. Thank you. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kalman. Dr. Roy, welcome.
Chairman Lobiondo, Ranking Member Larson, Chairman Schuster, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the unmanned aviation industry in the United States. I'm a professor in the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics at MIT. I lead a research program on unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, with a focus on unmanned flight in urban, civilian, or populated environments. Most recently, I worked with Google to found Project Wing, a UAV-based package delivery system. I returned to MIT full-time in September of this year. In this testimony, I am speaking today solely for myself and cannot speak for either MIT or Google. My main message today is that the U.S. does lead the world in UAV development, but both testing the next wave of technology needed for commercial UAV applications and training the next generation of engineers, both are more difficult in the U.S. than in other countries. Let me explain further. Firstly, the issues around small UAV commercialization are quite different compared to large, primarily military UAVs. Large UAVs are as safe and as reliable as manned aircraft. The U.S. is the unquestioned leader in this space, so I'm going to focus today on small UAVs for civil use. The vast majority of small UAVs are basically toy aircraft, such as model airplanes or quadrotor helicopters. This current generation of small UAVs exists because of advances in technology such as computers, GPS receivers, or batteries, leading to smaller, cheaper UAVs that are easy for anyone to fly. There are many companies proposing to use these technologies for commercial use, but right now, most commercial vehicles can only fly simple missions, generally with the same reliability as a toy. A lot of example uses have made the news in this country and other countries, but are for the most part prototypes or vaporware. In reality, the current civil UAV markets around the world, they're tiny, only hundreds to a couple of thousand vehicles at best. There are real technology gaps limiting the growth of UAVs. The recent FAA call for a Center of Excellence for Unmanned Aircraft Systems is a pretty good roadmap for what technology is needed for growth. But let me give you some examples. Most people know what it's like for the GPS in their car to get confused. This can and does happen to UAVs too. The vehicles need to have sensors and algorithms to let them know where they are at all times. UAVs need to know about ground obstacles and aircraft around them and how to avoid collisions. We need radio spectrum and new radio technologies that ensure the pilot in command can control the vehicle at all times. As the number of UAVs grows, the air traffic management infrastructure must grow alongside in order to coordinate the large number of UAVs flying through the national airspace system at any altitude. Lastly, an unmanned vehicle only makes sense when the operational cost is less than a manned aircraft. Onboard vehicle intelligence is needed to drive down the human labor costs in more applications. My point is that another wave of technology is required to scale up to products for imaging, agriculture, emergency response, or package delivery. U.S. researchers and companies absolutely lead in these and other technology areas. We do have a demonstrated track record in autonomy, algorithms, sensors, and communication. But there are hurdles. Firstly, from the Wright Cycle Exchange 100 years ago in Ohio to Hewlett-Packard to Apple, the creation myth of some of the most successful technology companies in the world is the small team of investors tinkering in a garage. The point is not the garage itself, but it gives the ability to test anywhere that is safe, and this massively accelerates the development cycle. Unfortunately, it's much harder to test UAV technology in the U.S. than in other countries. It's not impossible. The FAA does have a number of authorization mechanisms, but there's a considerable bar to entry for people who just want to work on the technology. The current processes might be right for authorizing a UAV-based pipeline inspection service across the length of North Dakota, but they're onerous for a two-person startup creating basic technology. Unfortunately, there isn't a single set of rules or procedures I can point to that can be adopted from another country that would work here, but there may be ideas to be learned. For example, a clear definition of legal test flight instead of a case-by-case approval process will let engineers know where they can literally set up their garage and start to work. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, the U.S. position of leadership depends on our ability to train engineers and scientists with the skills necessary to develop the requisite technologies. There are a growing number of universities teaching UAV technology to undergrads. To learn the foundations of UAVs requires real flight. While some institutions have access to COAs or are near one of the improved test sites, there are too few and the cost is substantial. The same processes that inhibit access to test areas limit how our educational institutions provide training in UAV technology. Furthermore, the support for basic research in UAV technologies is diminishing. Much of the progress in unmanned vehicles in the U.S. has been funded by forward-thinking program managers in ONR, ARO, AFOSR, DARPA, and NASA. These program managers have not only funded the technology to enable UAVs, but have funded the students who write software that is running on UAVs today. It is these students that are going to solve the technology challenges. Universities outside the U.S. are acting both as training grounds for a generation of UAV researchers and as incubators for UAV companies. Let me conclude by saying that the U.S. is not currently lagging other countries, regardless of the publicity around prototype demonstrations. The same technical hurdles will need to be overcome in any country before commercial UAVs become a reality of everyday life. Nevertheless, there are issues and constraints in this country that may allow other countries to overtake the U.S., both in technology development and in training the generation of engineers required to carry out that development. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. Chairman Schuster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate you bringing your expertise here, but I think it's important to point out that on this subcommittee, on the full committee, we have members that have expertise. We have pilots on this subcommittee, and I think I've got them all down there. Congressman Graves is a pilot, Congressman Hanna, Scott Perry. Congressman Perry is a helicopter pilot, but a pilot. We're going to be joined next Congress by Congressman Merkita, who's a pilot, and our Congressman Jeff Denham, when he served in the Air Force, was an aircraft mechanic. And our counsel, Naveen Rao, is a pilot. So we have a lot of expertise here, a lot of folks that understand what you're saying, and so I think it's going to be important as we move forward, listening to you, but listening to the experts that we have here on the subcommittee is very, very beneficial to us, and I'm happy that they're here and with us and able to help us guide us through this. First question to Captain Moak. In your written testimony, you stated that commercial UAS operators should hold a commercial pilot's license and instrument ratings, and we've heard that the skills to fly UAS are different, significantly different from those that require to fly a passenger jet. Some parts of the curriculum really seem to have little relevance to flying UASs. For example, UAS operators need to master stall and recovery techniques in a Cessna if they plan on flying a quadcopter. So what would be the relevance there? How would it benefit safety? And is there a scientific basis for your recommendation?
So we've been, on another committee I sat on, we've had the Air Force where they were working initially, all their UAS pilots over the last several years were coming out of the pilot pipeline. But as the need for more UAS operators for the U.S. Air Force increased, they set up a separate UAS track, which you may be familiar with. In that track, they do go through all the basic skills of flying for a couple of reasons. One is to understand when they're in the airspace, and the other is to make sure they're operating the UAS properly. So the Air Force has briefed us on that. We think it's a good model. With what the FAA has been doing, treating these as an airplane and going through a process of certificating the aircraft, certificating the operator, the person trying to operate it, the company, and then certificating the pilots, okay, and then monitoring and oversight of all that, I think is one of the precepts, the foundations of having continuing with a safe national airspace. So on your specific on should they be able to recover from a stall or each of that, I think there's room for that in any curriculum. I agree with you on that. I just think we need to be focused on that safety part of it.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So to modify it, you're not opposed to that if it doesn't make sense, okay?
Absolutely.
The second thing is that we've got some reports from newspapers and other media sources that leaking out some of the proposed rulemaking. And this question to Captain Moak, Mr. Kelman, and Mr. Roy. There appears to be not to be permitted to operate beyond the line of sight. And if that were the case, my concern is it would significantly reduce, almost eliminate, the benefits that a UAS system brings to us. So can you comment on that specific, that beyond the line of sight?
Right. So you've seen there's news stories all the time, but there's been two recent ones, one at JFK and one at Heathrow. And this would be a different hearing if this would have went down the engine of a aircraft. It would have been, catastrophic, and we'd have a different hearing today. I think what's important is if it's going to be operated in that method that you're talking about, there needs to be a way to have pilots that are flying be able to see it. And it's very difficult, if not impossible, to see this because much like other things in the air, if there's not relative motion, your eye can't pick it up, all right? And on the airspace issues, for example, for helicopters, 500 feet and below is where helicopters, life flight, and lots of other airplanes operate. So I would just suggest this. If we're going to be operating it beyond line of sight in dense areas, big sky, little airplane, but lots of airplanes, there needs to be a way for air traffic control to see it, for the airplanes to see it, for the person who's operating it to be able to communicate with air traffic control and with the airplanes in the area. And that, I believe with that you could very easily operate beyond line of sight. And then the only other thing, and we have experts over here, if you're in an area that's not populated by other airplanes, then of course you could operate it in that manner. But the only thing would be, what do you do with a lost link, which has happened quite a bit in the military,
Mr.
and where it goes.
Mr. Coleman, can you talk, based on what Captain Moak said there, can you comment on?
Thank you. I think this gets back to the earlier point I made on taking a risk-based approach. So in the case of beyond line of sight operations, you would be in a scenario where there are higher risks, but I think you can mitigate that through technology. So for example, in France today, what they're doing for beyond line of sight operations is they are only operating at very low altitudes where there isn't general aviation traffic or commercial traffic, and they're enhancing it through technologies such as cameras on board the system where an operator can actually see if there's other traffic in the area. To the point on lost link scenarios, they're utilizing technology I mentioned earlier for contingency management. So in the case where you do lose link with your operator, you're able to pre-program in so the UAV knows exactly how to respond in those cases. So depending on what the area is, what the environment is, it knows what a safe location is to return to. So these are the types of technologies that are already in place today.
Mr. Chairman, what if you yield me one more minute to let Mr. Roy respond to that, because I know his work with Google and MIT would be beneficial.
So my answer is very consistent with the previous two answers in the sense that beyond line of sight is eminently doable. Our risk-based profile makes a lot of sense. It's more feasible in unpopulated environments or where you have some notion of what the airspace contains. The technology issues are very consistent. Loss of link, there needs to be a contingency plan. Loss of link is a challenge. Maintaining situational awareness as the vehicle returns, that's a technology question that needs to be addressed. But these are eminently doable.
Right. Thank you very much. I know for the benefit of the FAA, I hope you heard a lot. To me, it was loud and clear. This is safety is paramount. Absolutely, I think we all agree with that. This can be done, and as we move forward, making sure that we're looking at the technology and the safety aspect of it. And again, one size doesn't fit all. Thank you,
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to focus my initial questions on this end of the table. I know folks on my side, I'll have some questions on for folks down here, but I wanted to talk a little bit about on the technology side. And is it Dr. Roy, have you looked at the use of the 6 test sites and made any assessment about whether they're being used as much as they can? And if you have made that assessment, what would you suggest be done otherwise?
So the 6 test sites are not my area of expertise, so I personally haven't done an assessment. MIT was heavily involved in setting up the New Air test site, and I got back to MIT this September, so been a bit busy, haven't looked at what's available there, but we hope to be flying there soon.
Well, given your research and your course of study, what would be an ideal environment?
So that's a good question. One of the limitations, I think, is the distance with which one has to go in order to get to the test sites, and the onus on setting up operations there. In an ideal world, I describe in my written testimony the ability to designate local test areas anywhere, local flight areas anywhere as test areas, and have clear rules, so that, for instance, if you are more than 150, I'm picking these numbers up entirely arbitrarily, but 150 meters from people on the ground or ground structure, and you have secured the airspace, then if you had the ability to do that, that would allow, presumably you could not do that in downtown Cambridge, but you could go further afield to an area where you could take your students more easily than having to drive to Griffiths Air Force Base and fly. Yeah.
Mr. Coleman, do you have some comments on just generally what an ideal environment for these test sites would look like? Or
yeah, absolutely.
How they'd operate, that is.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think the important thing for test sites is the ease of access, so that small companies, large companies all have the same opportunities to go utilize the airspace. Obviously, safety is of utmost importance, so being able to do that safely through, for example, issuing a NOTAM to other operators in the area so that they understand that there is some testing going on in these areas, but ensuring that these areas are able to allow for companies to get that approval and be able to come and utilize that space quickly and rapidly and at low cost to these companies.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk to the test sites about whether that's happening as well as some of the stakeholders. You talked a little bit about the risk-based approach and what it would look like. Is there any scenario where, since you're in the private sector, where you can envision a test to operation scenario, where we're like on the Armed Services Committee, we sort of broke through some of the acquisition on certain things to sort of to break through the slowness of the Pentagon to act on things. Is there, using that model, is there a scenario where we can get to a test to operation scenario at these test sites, maybe in certain cases?
Absolutely, and I think that could be very valuable. And I know organizations like NASA Ames are already engaged in looking at things like this to allow companies to bring their technology to showcase what it's capable of doing and ensuring that it will respond safely in a variety of different scenarios. I think that will be very important to have, and I think that there should be infrastructure for that.
Yeah. Dr. Roy?
I completely agree with that. I think that's essential because there are going to be operational scenarios that can't be represented in the test sites. So, for instance, as the commercial application of infrastructure inspection, package delivery, and so on, they're going to require more urban environments for testing. And so, as we stand up those markets, the test to operation is going to be an important part of that.
Yeah. In the minute I have left, I just want to come down to Ms. Gilligan about on the test sites and the issue of designated airworthiness representatives.
Yes.
You've designated one for Nevada, the Nevada test site. What about the others, and where is that something that test sites need to request, or is FAA trying to conclude that they ought to have these?
We've offered that as a tool, a technique for the test sites to be able to expand attracting industry into those locations. So we did it in Nevada. We've offered the training to all of the test sites. They've not yet offered a candidate for that training. We're ready whenever they are ready. And after the training, the designee then needs to actually demonstrate that they have the skill. That will be done with one of our engineers. And after that, the designee will be able to actually approve the operation of the vehicle for the test sites. We think that will help to expand the attraction for industry to come to those test sites.
Is this an ODA model, essentially?
At this point, it's individual designees. It's not necessary that it actually be an organizational designation because there isn't that level of demand that we've seen. Certainly, if the demand expands and we think an organizational model makes sense, we could certainly move to that.
Yeah. Okay. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman, and look forward to the rest of the questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Gilligan, this question I'm going to try to get to is the effectiveness interaction with FAA and the test sites. And there's a lot of FAA activity with UAS Arena, with the test sites and Section 333 and so on. Could you explain the respective roles of the FAA Tech Center, the test sites, the centers of excellence, cooperative research and development agreements, Section 333, in terms of how they are getting us towards UAS integration? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of stuff out here, but we're getting reports that the test centers are somewhat frustrated because there's not the interaction that they were expecting and we're not getting results. Can you talk about this?
I'd be glad to, Mr. Chairman. We have biweekly conferences with all of the test sites, and so I think we have begun to alleviate some of those early concerns. I do think the test sites got off to perhaps a slower start than we and they were anticipating as they really came to understand what it was that they'd undertaken. I think we're seeing good movement there. They all have approved COAs. They all have flight operations underway. We are collecting some amount of information from those, but of course the numbers are still small because they really are all just getting underway. I believe the improvement that Mr. Larson referred to with the ability for the test sites to have a designated airworthiness representative who can work with companies that want to use the test sites, we believe will go a long way to increasing the appeal of the test sites to some of the companies that my colleagues on the panel have talked about who want to do research in these areas. So we think that will be an important improvement as well.
So does the FAA have a plan to use these assets in a coordinated fashion?
For FAA research, we are looking at what our research needs are, and to the extent the test centers can help us fulfill those, and to the extent that we have funding for that research, we will certainly look to use the test sites. Right now, FAA has not placed research at any of the test sites. These test sites, as I say, were set up in accordance with the intent that we saw in the Act, which was to allow industry, which, as my colleagues have said, right now it's difficult for industry to have access to airspace for the purposes of research and development. We believe the test sites offer them the perfect opportunity to meet those research needs here in the U.S., and that's why we're working with the research, with the test sites to expand the ability for them to attract that kind of research. Again, if FAA research needs can be met at the test sites, we will certainly look to fund projects at those test sites as well.
So when you say you're working with the test sites to expand that opportunity, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Again, we're trying to keep them well informed about what they are able to do under the agreements that they have with the FAA. We now have individuals actually from the test center who will be traveling to each of the test sites to work with them more closely on what it is that we might be looking for to be able to get research data through the test sites. And then the designees, we believe, once the test sites take advantage of the ability to have a designee on site, we think that that will really open the doors for industry to take advantage of the test sites.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you are engaging with U.S. companies that might want to do research and development here in the U.S. versus overseas? And, excuse me, what I'm after is about some of these reports, media reports, that companies are frustrated. Are you interacting with these companies, or how are we trying to keep them to keep the jobs here, is what I'm getting at?
Yes, sir. The staff in our UAS office are interacting with industry constantly. There's a large conference, for example, this week out in New Mexico, a yearly conference. We are well represented there, and we are reaching out not only in public sessions but in private meetings with manufacturers to try to understand what are their needs and whether and where they can meet those needs. The recent newspaper report that you saw, we've been working with that applicant. They're looking at both an exemption under Part 333 as well as what we are recommending is that they seek certification for their vehicle under our special certification rules for the purposes of research. And we think that we can actually enable them to accomplish what they need to accomplish here in the U.S. through the test sites and through their own certification.
Well, there are obviously a lot of areas of interest here that we as a committee want to try to keep our fingers on, but while keeping safety paramount, the economic opportunities in an economy that can desperately use it is also at the top of our list. Thank you. Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gilligan, there's this inanity of the Anti-Deficiency Act where you can't give direction to someone utilizing a test site because they're providing an uncompensated service. Have your lawyers really looked at that to see whether or not there is a way around that, or are we going to need to legislate to fix that?
Our lawyers have looked at it, sir, at this point, and that's the advice that they've given us. I certainly will ask them to look more closely to see if there is some alternative. But at this point, we are, again, supporting the test sites by trying to make them attractive to industry, who really is the party that's interested in the research.
And I've also heard from some who use the test sites that there's quite a bureaucratic process to come in, and if you want to run one flight, you have to file all these papers, and then you want to modify something and run another. You can't just do it. You can't just say, well, we're going to change 8 parameters and we're going to do another flight.
We are working with the test sites. We've actually asked them to come in with a proposal for what we're calling a broad co-authorization. They are working on that proposal so that we can start to address some of these concerns.
Right. I mean, you've got the test site. We've got all those parameters in place, and then someone comes there and say, oh, well, come back in another 30 days if you want to run a little modified operate. They should be able to do it on a test site, be able to do multiple operations with different parameters. It would be useful for your people to observe. It would be useful, obviously, for their development or greatly facilitate things. So I hope that we can do that very quickly. Why aren't there more test sites? We limited it to 6, but why couldn't we have more? I mean, we just limited it to 6. Is there any reason why we couldn't have more test sites? It doesn't cost you anything, right?
well, it does cost us in
In terms of
we have
personnel
people,
monitoring, yes, et
yes,
cetera.
we have people who work very closely with
Right,
the test sites,
right.
and so there is a resource.
Yeah, but I don't
limitation.
consider them very well geographically dispersed. There's a lot, I mean, as with the point was made down here, for a small startup to have to travel 1,000 miles to a test site, I mean, that's another thing we ought to look at. Are we seriously pursuing a risk-based approach, which just makes so much sense to me, living in the West and knowing that there are vast areas with agriculture where you could be operating safely and there are no potential conflicts, or virtually none?
Yes, sir. We are using a risk-based approach as we look at each of the 333 requests for exemption, for example, to make sure that we understand what is the level of risk and what limitations need to be added to it. We are doing the same, and I think one of the panelists referred to it. We do have applicants who want to actually certify the systems, and we're using the same risk-based approach there. We're looking at our certification rules, and with the applicant, we're looking at what are the risks that need to be addressed by design standards, and what standards can we pick from the standards that exist right now
Right.
for
Well,
manned
geographic makes a lot of sense as a starting point for a risk-based approach in terms of density of operations, proximity to secondary, tertiary, general airports, critical airspace, whole different problem. So that's, I hope you're seriously working on that. There's one other question to you, and that is the staff has provided something. They say that in the case of the film industry, that after they got the Section 333, they have to get a separate operating authorization, which has not yet been granted. So,
Yes, they need approval to operate in the airspace, and we need to be able to put out a notice to airmen where the operations are occurring. I believe all but one of them have now gotten that approval for at least one particular location.
Okay.
But we agree that under the exemptions process, we might be able to make that more efficient as well. We're looking closely at how we could do that.
okay, and this is to the panel generally, or maybe that end. I mean, transponders. How small can a useful transponder be these days?
Some of the smaller transponders that can be used now in UAVs can be right now about the size of a cell phone, maybe even smaller.
What, cell phone?
Yeah, about cell phone size. So those are some of the smaller systems. There's still some costs associated, but I think that it could be a helpful technology when you're at a higher altitude where there could be other traffic in the area.
Right.
Low altitudes.
We said over a certain altitude, you got to have a transponder. In certain kinds of critical airspace, you've got to have a transponder. I mean, because right now these things are invisible.
Yep. So right now you can get that done.
Crude radar systems. So that's correct. Okay, and then this lost link. That's been a problem with the military. You think you've got that nailed in terms of having, if you have the geospatial restrictions and that's all somehow programmed in, and these things can find a safe harbor point remotely, and they know they've lost a link, so they're going to go to that point.
Mm-hmm. Typically how that would work is the manufacturers of the vehicles know what a safe amount of lost link time is. And for example, they can specify in certain applications where a link is absolutely critical, and if there's any sort of lost link, it needs to immediately return to the landing location in a way that is safe. In other cases, a lot of these systems are so highly autonomous that interruptions in the link may not be as important if it's in an area where it's controlled. So it's all depending on the risk of the situation, and you can actually program a lot of that into the actual avionics of the system.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on some of what you were just sharing, Mr. Coleman. You talked a lot about technology and where we are. We see an aircraft sitting in front of Captain Moak there. Is it possible to put in the type of technology, or can you expand on the types of technology that would increase safety, but yet not require an aircraft license, as the gentleman to your right is advocating, that would keep us safe? What other technologies are out there?
Yeah, so I mentioned two very important ones: the geofence technology, which is very common in the industry and can be used on vehicles as small as the ones you see here. The contingency management functionality, it gets to the lost link. Also, loss of GPS functionality, so that should the vehicle no longer be able to make itself aware of where it is, it knows how to land safely. There's a lot of really great research going on right now here in the United States and other parts of the world that Professor Roy talked about on sense and avoid technology. I think that's going to be a critical piece for enabling a lot of these higher risk applications at higher altitude with other traffic in the air, and there's already very significant advancements in that area as well.
So how confident are you that if we do not change our regulatory scheme that Canada, Australia, Europe will own this type of technology, and on a scale of 1 to 10 being most confident that if we don't change things that we're going to lose out?
I would say I'm pretty confident because we're seeing a lot of the highly skilled manufacturers in Europe really surpassing a lot of the U.S. companies because of their ability to go and iterate, do very frequent testing, do a lot of research on their products where they're able to actually go 2 or 3 generations in their products where a U.S. company may only be able to do it once. So we are starting to see some of that.
So they're actually doing a lot more testing in Europe or Canada or other places than we are here.
It's just because a lot of the main manufacturers there have easy access to testing facilities.
So Ms. Gilligan, let me come to you. From an FAA standpoint, obviously we have some 6 sites that we're talking about, but if there is so much work going on in these foreign countries, are you gathering data in terms of commercial activity from them, successes, failures, or are we just being more focused on the United States and not learning from their mistakes or successes?
No, sir. There's a lot of coordination at the international level, both in terms of what should we as an industry be setting as the standards for these operations, as well as sharing experience that we are seeing around the world. But I do want to comment on the vast differences in the complexity of our airspace and our aviation system over some of the other countries where we are seeing that there is some easier access. We have 10 times the number of registered airplanes than our friends to the north. We have multiple times the numbers of operations.
And that's without a doubt. But there, as Mr. DeFazio was talking about, there are certainly areas where the risk would be minimal. I've learned today that I probably violated a federal law by taking pictures of a golf course. Now, there was more danger of somebody getting hit by a golf ball than there is from the drone that flew over it to take the pictures. But as we see that, can we not look at it on a risk-based assessment and really open up the testing so that our airline pilots can feel comfortable with what we have, but yet not keep it so confined?
We're working closely with the test site in North Dakota, for example, with just that in mind. Recognition that there is a lower level of air traffic over most of the state of North Dakota, and they're looking at how they can broaden access for that test site. So yes, sir, we agree that there are areas where this can safely be accomplished, and we're looking at working with the test sites on how we can expand that.
So have we implemented any recommendations that we've received from foreign countries that would actually help alleviate some of this, or are we just gathering data?
I'm not aware that we have recommendations from foreign countries that would address this, but we are learning from their experience and looking at how.
But if we're learning and not implementing, that's not doing any good, is it?
I'm sorry, what I was going to say is we are learning from them and looking at how we can implement what they've learned safely here in this system. We continue to look for ways to do this safely.
All right. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Meadows. I want to thank the members for watching the clock. You may have noticed Mr. Larson and I kept ourselves on the clock. We have a lot of folks who want to ask questions, so I appreciate that. We'll now go to Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent Las Vegas, so there was a lot of enthusiasm in Nevada for the development of drones or UAS. We've got a lot of open space. We've got Creech Air Force Base. We've got a very creative gaming industry that wants to provide bottle service by the pool with these things. I mean, the potential is great. We applied to become a test center. We got that. I was supportive of that. We've been working on it. But the enthusiasm is starting to wane because that test site is not producing like we thought it would. Now, I hear Ms. Gilligan being positive about it, but the things that I hear from people who have briefed me from Nevada are more in line with what Dr. Dillingham pointed out. They just don't think it's getting off the ground, so to speak. And I've heard Ms. Gilligan say about 3 different times, we are working on this so we can start to address some of the concerns. Well, that doesn't give me a lot of comfort because you've been working on the rule for such a long time. I don't think working on it to address the concerns is going to get us there in time to be competitive. I don't know why a business wouldn't just go test in Canada instead of going to one of our test centers. It seemed to me there are 3 problems that I hear over and over from the different folks from Nevada who come and talk to me. One is they don't know what information should be collected. It's just not been clear to them what data is needed, how to put it together, what procedures should be followed. Now, I hear Dr. Dillingham say you're working on establishing that, but there's no time frame for when that's going to be done, so that could be, who knows when that might be. A second problem that they seem to have is this speeding up the COA process. We heard some reference to that. You'd have to do it over every single time, takes so long. I wonder why we couldn't maybe prioritize the COAs for the test sites over others, because that seems to be where we want to put our emphasis. Third, the problem of intellectual property, protecting industrial secrets, so to speak, of companies that come and test there that have to give all this information to the FAA and the public. I just wonder if you would address some of these questions, Ms. Gilligan, and Dr. Dillingham, would you give us your perspective on it?
Yes, ma'am, I'd be glad to. If I could start with the last one first. That's why we are very pleased to see that Nevada has stepped out to begin the approval process for a designee. We believe, and I think they believe, that using a designee will allow them to bring industry into the site without having to put in jeopardy the intellectual property that I know some of the folks who wanted to work at that site have had. So we think that's an important step forward. I believe the approval for that designee should be completed this month. And so I think with that, the test site will see that they can now sort of market that they have the ability for industry to bring their research projects to this test site and not put at risk the intellectual property that was a concern earlier on. So I think that's an important improvement, and we applaud Nevada for stepping out first to take that on. In terms of COAs, we do prioritize the requests. All of the test sites have approved authorities now for airspace. There are some that are still pending. We're, again, trying to work through those as quickly as we can because we agree with you. The test sites have been designated as a location where we can take advantage of what we can learn to continue to integrate UAS safely. So we are pursuing that as well. And I'm sorry, I forget the first one.
Yeah, I've forgotten the first one myself. What information should be collected?
The data, I'm sorry, yes. Again, we saw these sites initially and primarily, and continue to see them primarily, to be a place where industry can go to do the research and development that they want to do, the work that some of my colleagues here on the panel have talked about. In terms of what data the FAA needs, we now realize that that is a valuable piece of information for the test sites to have. With the applications for the Centers of Excellence, we have identified the research needs that the FAA has, and again, in our biweekly conference calls with the test sites, as well as now with the visits that will be made by our staff from the Technical Center, we're going to be working closely with the test site operators to make sure that we and they understand what could be helpful to FAA based on the work that they're seeing at their test sites. So we will be ideal.
Dr. Dillingham?
Well, Ms. Titus, you hit on all the key points, the same stories that we've been hearing from the test sites. We've had the opportunity to interview half of them and visit some of the test sites, and those are the key issues. I think in terms of increasing their value and their capacity to input, I think Ms. Gilligan, as FAA fulfills those things that Ms. Gilligan talked about, that will go a long way. But I think sort of key to this is something that Mr. DeFazio said about looking at this anti-deficiency law and seeing is there a way that funds could be made available to pay for research or support research at the test sites, and also in terms of the idea that we only have 6 test sites. I mean, our information suggests that in Canada, for example, they are ready to designate a very large airspace up to 18,000 feet for testing beyond visual line of sight. So perhaps as we move towards the next stage of this, that not only additional test sites and maximum use of the current ones, that we again think in terms of this risk-based approach to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to question. I don't sit on the subcommittee, but I have a great interest in it. From the context of safety, juxtaposed with the industry and the things that we're missing out on, I think, as well as the time it's taken to come by the rule, my mindset is many, but I'm just looking at an article in a local paper on November 14th of this year, which is not too long ago, at 4:30 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, so it's not on the weekend. An EMS helicopter flown by a guy that I used to fly with in the military at about 600 or 700 feet AGL encountered a UAS about 50 feet away from the aircraft and did a pretty strong evasive maneuver to make sure that he didn't hit the aircraft. And they didn't have his patient on board. He was coming back from having the patient on board. But that concerns me. And it's not just EMS. It's, reports from Kennedy where just in the same month, on November 16th, one came within 10 feet of the left wing of a Delta Airlines flight, which is concerning. And so we want everybody hobbyists, people that want to use it for business, and so on and so forth, to be able to access the airspace, but we also need to make sure that we're all understand what the rules are and that they make sense. With that in mind, just one question for you, Mr. Muck. What's the cost of one of the engines on the airplane you fly?
Millions and millions of dollars.
I mean, literally over $1 million just for the engine.
Absolutely.
Right. So, I mean, if it's foughted out,
no.
If the UAS were to fly through it or hit it.
Well, this is, just to be clear, because I think maybe this wasn't clear, this has a GPS in it. This has geocoding in it. It has the ability to do the things. When it loses lost link, it's supposed to come back. So this going through an engine would do that damage that we showed in the earlier picture. And to really be clear, we're all over this risk-based security, risk-based approach to it. And we also commend the steady hand of the FAA in making sure that as we bring them on, they're safe. But again, we'd have a different conversation if it ran into that EMS helicopter or it was 10 feet closer to that Delta jet. We need to
Ms. Gilligan, can I ask you a question in that regard? What specifications, if you can enumerate at this point or give us some insight, is the FAA contemplating to incorporate into UAS to ensure that pilots can detect and avoid, and pilots don't look just straight ahead in the direction they're flying. You have to look almost in 360 degrees. You can't look behind you. And then if you could address all-weather capability of UAS and what the plan is for that. Anonymous operation, if that aircraft were to hit the other aircraft, how do we know who owned it, and then maybe liability if that's germane to this current conversation?
Thank you, Congressman. On the question of standards, we have several groups that are industry groups that are working on advising us on what those standards should be. Through the RTCA, we have had a special committee working on UAS standards. They expect to put forward their first set of draft standards around this time next year, with final standards due about a year after that, which is the standard process that we use when we're setting new design standards. In the meantime, we do have some applicants who have come in to get certification for their vehicles. They're working out of our Los Angeles Aircraft Certification Office. We are approaching the certification basis with those applicants by looking at our current regulations and identifying those that are appropriate for this kind of technology. As it relates to the small UAS, we do have our rule that will be coming out shortly, which will make proposals around a number of these areas, and we'll look for comments back on those as well.
Are you talking, is for instance, lighting, a strobe, or after hours of darkness, required lighting, proximity warning or TCAS, or something of that magnitude? And then if you could address the anonymous component or the ability to track who owns it if there is a liability issue.
Again, we do not have existing standards for the design or manufacture of unmanned aerial systems for civil use. That's why we're working with RTCA and ASTM, both of them internationally recognized standards-setting organizations, to define, working with the industry, what should those standards be. And that's work that's underway and that the community completely agrees needs to be well developed to address just the kinds of risks that you're talking about. The other issue, which is something we're seeing now, the operation of small UAS fundamentally by people who are able to buy them but who have no aviation history or experience, who in many cases don't even realize they have a responsibility to know that they're operating in the national airspace system. Our first approach to that is through education. We're doing a tremendous amount of outreach. We're working with the manufacturers who are voluntarily putting information into the kit, into the box when you get it, about what those responsibilities are if you're going to operate a small UAS. They are directing people who buy them to look at the modeling, the American Modelers Association website, which has a tremendous amount of safety information for the operation of these kinds of small vehicles. The dilemma is not many of the folks who buy these are really modelers, as you and I might have understood that, which was about building the airplane and the joy of that. They are, as Captain Moak indicates, you can purchase these very easily and fly them pretty quickly after you've gotten them to your home.
Thank you. I yield.
Ms. Esty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing on the future of unmanned aircraft systems, and I want to thank all the witnesses. I'm sort of at the opposite end of the spectrum from Representative Titus. I live in the state of Connecticut, where we have some of the most congested airspace in the country. And so for my state, which has been long at the forefront of aerospace design, I see both tremendous opportunity for American businesses and for workers in my state, but also serious risk. I was at an event recently, a charity event, which I had my first encounter with a drone, which was a little hard to actually be appropriately reflective during a benediction while a drone was overhead. So it kind of brought home what the reality of that is. So I want to return to one of my favorite topics, which is next gen, and ask several of you and it really goes to your point, Ms. Gilligan. I don't think we can rely on the hobbyists here to take the time that modelers have always taken because they see themselves in the aviation space. These are people who are enjoying toys in some cases and don't have that sense of responsibility of if seagulls can take down an aircraft, what do we think something out of metal can do? And all it's going to take is one horrific accident. So I'd like to ask you, Captain Moak, can you talk a little bit about how you see what we need to do in next gen to keep your pilots and all of the air passengers safe in this country, what we need to be doing with next gen and how quickly and what resources and how we need to integrate. And Mr. Hampton, you're next on deck on this, about the utter importance of integrating both of these together, which I think is tremendously important. We need to move very rapidly. Thank you.
Okay, so we work with the unmanned aircraft systems groups, and they shouldn't be defined by this because they also have the same concerns we have of one of these causing an accident. All right, so the risk-based approach we're working with them on, we're working with the FAA. On next gen, the larger type of systems that would be in the airspace, there has to be a way for the pilot in the cockpit, if it's going to be in the same airspace, to be able to see it. There has to be a way for our controllers who keep the airspace very safe to be able to see it on their scopes in their control room. Currently, we do that with IFF. We have ADS-B in and out with NextGen coming online. And I'm confident that these technological challenges that we're facing here, going through a process same kind of process we use to certify aircraft and operators, that we'll be able to do that at some point. But right now, they're being defined by this, and what we have to be mindful of is as the airspace gets more crowded, not less, that we have those same capabilities. When the Air Force comes to the Next Gen Committee, sets on it, their concern is how they're going to be integrated in the airspace, ADS-B in and out, and whatnot. So that's really, I think that's really the focus and the tie-in with Next Gen, Congresswoman.
Yes, Mr. Hampton,
yes.
too, about this integration effort of Next Gen with UAS.
Currently, a lot of today's discussion has been focused on the smaller UAS. When we did our review last year, UAS are operating today. Of the authorized, they call, Ms. Gilligan in the industry calls them COA. There are about 500 of them. DoD operates them now in the UAS. They're on the border. Albuquerque Center, Los Angeles Center, and the only preliminary work's begun to look at the air traffic control systems and the adjustments that have to be made. In particular, the automation systems. Take a look at the 2.4 billion ERAM system, the flight planning system. That's going to have to be adjusted. Another one we talk about is the voice switch. Today, most of the discussion's been about pilots talk to controllers via voice commands. Today, that discussion is going to have to be with the person that's operating the system that's on the ground, not in the cockpit of the system. So a great deal of work has to be done to think about how systems in the air traffic control system have to be adjusted. Some work's begun. It's in its infancy, and that has to be done now. I think the planning and requirements adjustments, that's something that has to be done very quickly.
And if anyone's got thoughts on the funding, if this is appropriate to go to the industry to seek the resources to realize both the safety but also the opportunity for industry, and if anyone would care to get into that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Your time's just about
expired. Thank you.
Mr. Farenthold.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Ms. Gillingham. We created Section 333 to push the FAA to begin allowing small U.S. operations before finalizing the rule. Y'all's stated goal was to approve these petitions within 120 days. However, only 7, according to my figures, have been granted to date, and 60 applications are past the 120-day window. What's the status of these petitions, and can we expect to see more timely response to them, especially with regard to areas you've pre-designated as the test site? It seems obvious that you can let the airmen know that in these areas there's going to be a presence of UAVs. You can dedicate airspace to them. You certainly ought to be able to streamline around the test centers.
Yes, sir. I'm pleased to say that there were 5 additional exemptions that were issued today, so there are now 12 exemptions that have been granted. And
there are 200 filed.
And there are, I believe, slightly over 160, but we'll confirm that number for you. Having said that, we agree that we need to speed this up a little bit. Each of them is somewhat more unique than we were anticipating, but we are learning quickly as we've gone through this first set. As to the test sites, we actually believe that the statute intended for them to be separate from the test sites. They are for commercial service, which is actually not the reason for the test sites. The test sites are about.
Let me ask you something real quick with commercial service.
Sure.
First off, I'm also worried about the cat being out of the bag. I've got a quadcopter on my Christmas list, as I suspect quite a few people do. So at some point, there are going to be so many of these that are out without, and we're not going to know who owns them. I mean, you can look back to the FCC and the walkie-talkies. They came with a card where you're supposed to register them, but nobody did. And I think this is a more dangerous scenario, and it's something that I think you guys need to be putting a priority on. When there are too many of these out here capable of going beyond a couple of hundred feet, but actually being able to go up to 6,000 feet, we've got a problem, and our failure to regulate them, we're going to have a genie out of the bottle issue. So I'm going to ask Dr. Dillingham, you studied this. How can we speed this up? I mean, things move at internet speed now. These are considered tech devices. The Silicon Valley gets stuff done in weeks, not years.
Yes, sir. This is a situation that, although we've studied, we don't have an answer for because, as you pointed out, we are talking about civilians, regular public, using these kind of platforms. And there are already existing regulations that the modelers follow, but the public has not adhered to it, because I would
Do we have
argue,
the resources to enforce that, to enforce that against, tens of thousands of these that are going to be sold this Christmas?
it is going to be a difficult or almost impossible task, because FAA already has so many calls on its resources. I think what Ms. Gilligan said earlier probably is one of the best steps. That is education for the public, that there are in fact rules and regulations that they need to follow. And when we see these public announcements of individuals being fined or otherwise the FAA acting on them, that probably is going to have to be one of the incentives
even
as
the
well.
existing regulations, assuming they were enforced, let's say I buy a quadcopter, put a GoCam on it, and go out to my friend's ranch and film some deer around a deer feeder. I'm perfectly legal at that point. I post that to my blog that has Google Ads on it. All of a sudden, I've probably crossed into a gray area of commercial use, and I mean that's that's a lot of fine line distinctions to have to educate the public about.
I can't argue with that, sir. You're right.
All right. And Ms. Gilligan, I'll give you an opportunity to answer my question or concern that we're operating at the speed of the internet, and if our regulations can't keep up technology, and there's so many of those out there, we're really going to have a dangerous situation. Is there a sense of urgency?
Yes, sir. There is within the FAA. As I commented in my opening remarks, our small UAS rule has been delayed beyond what any of us think is acceptable, but we believe our balanced proposal will be out shortly, and we'll start to get comment and finalize those rules.
Thank you very much. I see my time has expired.
Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gilligan, you mentioned that a rule would be coming out shortly. And Mr. Hampton, you've documented the ways that we're kind of behind schedule. I understand that things rarely go according to schedule, whether you're in the private sector or the public sector. But when you say a rule is going to be coming out shortly, to quote a colleague, is that in a geological timescale or an internet speed?
The proposal is under executive review at this point, sir, so I really can't tell you exactly what the time frame is. But as I said, I think all of us who are involved in the project understand how important it is to get this out as quickly as we can now.
I would be remiss in my oversight responsibility here if I didn't get a date or some kind of commitment at this hearing so that when we're at the next hearing, we can measure progress toward that. What are some of your goals in the next year?
Well, for the rulemaking, the Department of Transportation has a public website which shows the rules scheduled for release by the end of this year. Once the rule is released, it will go out for public comment. That period will last anywhere between 60 and 90 days, depending on what the community asks for. There is some concern we will get a substantial number of comments, which will delay how quickly we can get to the final rule. But we'll certainly keep the committee informed of how we are progressing once we are able to publish the rule.
To Ms. Edsey's point earlier, how are we going to make sure these rules are copacetic with the next gen? Is putting ADS-B in every drone, is that going to be one of the answers? Would that allow them to interoperate?
Well, sir, I can't really comment on what's in the rule because it is a pending rulemaking. But as I said, we have the industry very tightly involved with us in determining what should be the design standards for these kinds of platforms when they are to be certified by the FAA. So we'll base our decisions on what the community recommends.
One of my concerns for drones and the commercial development of them is if you require something like ADS-B and there's no low-cost solution to that, are we throwing up another impediment? Because the low-cost solution to ADS-B doesn't exist right now for private aircraft. And do you see any progress in that field?
Well, again, the industry members of the committees who are advising us know that they must address the risks that are posed by the ability to sense and avoid other aircraft, and for the unmanned platform to be able to be seen by both controllers and pilots in the system. They are working hard on what exactly those technology solutions can be, and we're sure they'll find them.
I know you don't want to comment on a rule because it's not been released, but can you give us some indication? Is it going to be risk-based, or to what degree will you incorporate those recommendations of a risk-based strategy?
I can tell you that we did take a risk-based approach. It is the approach we use now for all of our standards. We also look at performance standards rather than directing particular technology solutions, for example. And those are just the general policies that we follow.
So I've got a question for Mr. Coleman or Dr. Roy here. Some experts have talked about integrating privacy by design. We're talking about safety. What about privacy here? This is a concern, a genuine concern that the larger public has, I think. Are you aware of any technology solutions to the privacy issue?
To the privacy issue, and I think it's important to state that privacy is definitely one of the things of utmost importance for the UAV industry and a lot of the companies in it. And to your point on privacy by design, I think a lot of manufacturers are engaging in this today and doing things like restricting, for example, where cameras can and cannot turn on board the aircraft, protecting that valuable information. But ultimately, I feel that privacy is really independent of the type of technology that's collecting that information. I feel that privacy is really about what information is private, what information is public, and ensuring that we protect that independent of the different types of collection methods.
Dr. Roy?
I'd also like to add that privacy is a little bit of a moving target, and it varies from not just country to country, but across the U.S. as well. And it's really a question of expectations. I think that when we talk about your suggestion of privacy technology, I think so long as the public understands what information is being collected and has clarity into that, then that will go a long way towards actually defining privacy.
Quick question. I don't know if there'll be time for an answer, but one of the things, in addition to a ceiling, that I would like to see is a floor. What's a reasonable expectation on your property? If something's an inch above the ground, is it trespassing? If it's 10 feet above the ground, is it trespassing? And you have the right to engage a trespasser. So that's something that I would like to see considered along the privacy lines. And I think my time has expired.
It has.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand because of the number of folks you have and the number of folks we have, we'll kind of go at 2 to your side and 1 to our side and get through this. I want to yield a little bit of time to Mr. DeFazio, who has a question, and then I'll take the rest of the 5 minutes.
I thank gentlemen. Try and do this quickly. When we see these things in the New York airspace, have we found anybody operating illegally who is putting people at risk? I mean, you've talked about some commercial violations. You caught anybody who's put people at risk with one of these things?
I can't make the correlation, sir, to some of the reports that we had and some of the cases that we have.
Right, because we don't know who's operating them, who owns them, or anything. How about a system where we require registration, licensure, with user fees? The user fees go to help you with the deficiencies in your budget, and you vary the license according to the uses and the weight and the capabilities, so the costs for would be appropriate. So it's not going to be burdensome on little small. But so anyway, think about that. There's no real answer now, but I think that's the way to go. We need to know who has these things, who's operating them, and people are putting people at risk, taking a plane down. They got to be prosecuted. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hampton, the FAA UAS Working Group has recommended the Integration Office be placed a higher level within FAA. Have you looked at, or do you have an assessment whether or not you think moving the UAS Integration Office would help coordinate efforts better across the agency?
Sorry about that. That's a very good question. In industry, that's a very significant concern. At this time, I think we're more concerned about outcomes. And as going forward in the reauthorization process, I think we'd have to look a year from now and see the outcomes and whether things have advanced. We're going to quickly, FAA is going to quickly move from a situation from actually planning to actual execution on a number of fronts. So I think we'd have to wait in about a year from now and see where we've gone with the execution of the rule, whether we've gone where FAA's response to a number of our recommendations on developing and executing a framework for collecting data, where we've come with the test sites. So I think that's a very real possibility. I think the key, I'm not really too concerned about how FAA is organized and structured, but outcomes, sir. And I think that's a very, very good question. The office was structured, and it does a very good job of coordinating. A year ago, we were concerned about requirements of what's important for it to actually begin to develop the regulatory framework, do controller training. So requirements and the position of the office to execute things and make things happen with a sense of urgency. So I think we'd have to take a look at that in about 6 months to a year, sir.
All right. Just for the record, I'm hopeful we'll be done with this reauthorization well before that year is up.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Dillingham, from your discussion with test site operators and other stakeholders, do you have any thoughts about how test sites could increase the level of participation in the UAS integration efforts?
Yes, Mr. Larson. We, in our conversations with the test sites, in addition to the blanket COA that Ms. Gilligan talked about, and the appointment of the airworthiness director, the test sites also talked about perhaps they could be a part of FAA's approval process of the Section 333s. That number is going to increase, and it's a workload burden on FAA. We are hearing that it'll be 2 or 3 years before we have a rule. So in the meantime, any tools that are available to further the idea of commercial use of UAS would certainly be helpful. The idea, something was talked about earlier, again, is sort of the development of an integrated budget that allows FAA to be more supportive of the test sites, as well as, again, we bring back, are there issues around the anti-deficiency law that can be somehow dealt with so that it allows FAA to adhere to the law but also be supportive of the test sites?
Yeah, okay. Captain Moak, just one final question on this. How are ALPA pilots communicating near misses on unmanned aircraft to FAA? Is there a structured way to do that, and are you confident that every near miss that is seen is being reported?
So if you see one of these, you're going to take action to avoid it. You're then going to appoint, you're then going to report it to the controlling authority. So if we're out in the approach corridor, we're going to be talking to approach, and we're going to let them know immediately so that they can make sure someone else doesn't go in the same airspace. If we're on the tower frequency, we would report it to tower at that time. Then on the once we're on the ground safely and have gotten to the gate, we have a ASAP reporting program that we work with the FAA and the companies with. We report it through that so that everybody can know about it. I'm not confident. I am confident that when someone sees it, we are reporting it. I am not confident that we're seeing them because they're very small, and like I was saying earlier, we don't have any indication in the airplane like we do with TCAS with the other aircraft, and the relative motion necessary for your eye to be able to pick it up is difficult, especially this size and maybe just a little bigger. So it is a real issue. Our pilots are reporting them, and we just need to stay on top of it. I'd like to see us take some kind of construct on this type of problem that we took with the green laser problem we were having, and we became a lot more successful on reporting and also prosecution of people that were pointing those lasers at pilots on final.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I echo the comments of Chairman Lobiando and Chairman Schuster. on UAS, both from a safety perspective as well as an opportunity for economic growth. The briefing materials that we were provided by the committee cite that UAS systems will have an $82 billion economic impact and possibly provide up to 100,000 jobs by the year 2025. So my questions should be viewed through that lens. I'd like to start with Associate Administrator Gilligan. One of the benefits I see with the UAS is more efficiency in rural areas like the one I represent, especially viewing farmland. And precision agriculture could be aided by UAVs, and we could reduce the cost of a farmer's input and also make sure that we have proper drainage and better production and better environmental impact. So one thing that can hamper this is a requirement. If the rule required a pilot's license in order for a farmer to operate a UAV, can you confirm if the small UAS rule would require a farmer in my district to actually get a pilot's license in order to use one?
Unfortunately, sir, because we are in rulemaking, I'm not able to talk about what's contained in the rule. We are very mindful, however, of how easily UAS could be applied to agricultural operations. Of course, we also have a very active ag pilot community that we're dealing with as well, who are very concerned about operating in airspace with these kinds of platforms. So we're looking at how we can address all of those safety risks and how they can be mitigated. Well,
thank you. Please note my concern of requiring that if that is going to be part of the rule. Dr. Roy, the FAA's slow pace may be causing our best and brightest to maybe leave the United States, especially when you look at major U.S. tech companies that have moved their research and development operations overseas. Do your students have better job opportunities outside the United States in this field?
So the field is small right now in commercial UAVs. So the job opportunities are few and far between in the U.S. and in other countries. But I think you've heard from several people that the rate at which the opportunities are growing in other countries possibly is going to lead to a lot more opportunities. I'd say that it's immeasurably small around the world right now. But I would worry that there are many more. I personally am seeing more startups, very, very small startups, but more startups outside the U.S. than in the U.S.
Right, Mr. Coleman, one of the major issues with UAVs is the flyaway problem, where they lose connectivity and fly away. It affects consumer UAVs, but also very high-end aircraft with the military. How do we mitigate that risk, and how do we integrate this into our aviation system?
Yeah, and I think to reiterate also that safety, again, is of utmost importance. And I think with the flyaway issues, that's a matter of technology. I think that the technology is increasing at a very rapid pace. I mentioned earlier a lot of the functionality in a lot of these systems to manage a lot of issues that happen on board the aircraft. Typically, that's where you'll see those types of things. You'll lose the GPS or something along those lines. So making sure that the systems have the ability to know how to automatically respond should any system fail on board the aircraft and be able to return it to a location that is determined safe before the flight. So I think those will be very, very important to ensure.
All right. Captain Moak, safety's paramount. On the flight simulators that many of your pilots use to train, is there a simulation for UAVs?
Not per se, but there is simulation for, detect and avoid. You visually pick up something, or if you have a situation where you're losing control of the aircraft because perhaps you had to maneuver it in a manner that you wouldn't normally be maneuvering it, meaning you were banking it excessively, and how you recover from that upset situation. We do have that.
Thank you, Captain. And thank you all for being here today. Obviously, this is an issue that we should be able to address. We've seen unmanned aircraft fly sorties within the theater of war in a much smaller area than they've done it safely. We ought to be able to not fall behind countries like Canada in putting together our rulemaking process so that we can get commercial UAVs into the marketplace and do it in a way that's going to be safe. I have concerns, too, with our medical helicopters. I'm in the flight line of my house in Taylorville, Illinois. I want to make sure that we have these rules in place. We can do this. So I appreciate your work and look forward to hearing you at the next hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think most all the questions have been asked, but a couple of comments I would like to make. And I was pleased to hear Ms. Gilligan mention agriculture because I'm very concerned about that. During the periods between May and August, at least in the Midwest, we have heavy traffic at and below 300 feet. That's going to and from the airport, and that's on the site where they're spraying too. And it's a big concern. There is a huge potential out there for UAVs and in the agriculture sector, but they're in that same airspace, and it concerns me a great deal. And this just comes down to, and Captain Moak mentioned it comes down to visibility and being able to see these things. And I don't necessarily know what the answer is. I don't think transponders are necessarily the answer. That certainly gives air traffic control visibility on them, but if you're on a VFR flight plane and you're not talking to air traffic control, you don't have the benefit of that site. ADSB, if we put ADSB out on them, obviously that's going to paint them, but you got to have ADSB in to be able to, to read that as well. And it still comes down to situational awareness. And, obviously the people that are flying the aircraft, or at least the manned aircraft, they've got that situational awareness. But just as Captain Moak pointed out, a VFR aircraft traveling 100 knots right on up to our airlines traveling 350 knots and everything in between, you're moving pretty fast, and that's awful small. And it's very hard to see it, particularly if there is no relative motion. So I've got a huge concern with how we're going to move forward. And, I hope you're, and I know you are, being very diligent in this, and I'm not so sure that we don't need to take a more active role in Congress as well when it comes to reauthorization. But it concerns me. It concerns me in a big way, and we haven't even begun to talk about the safety of individuals on the ground when these things do go rogue. And what happens to those folks? We're just talking about aviation and the potential, and I don't want to run into one. I don't. Interestingly enough, there are a lot of birds out there, and we have bird strikes, but birds have situational awareness too, and they'll get out of your way for the most part. But this is a big concern. I guess there is no question in that, but we need to move very, very carefully as we move forward.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Graves. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here today. Appreciate it. I'm from Texas. We got a lot of airspace in Texas. And my question to you would be, Ms. Gilligan, as companies look for economical ways to modernize their delivery systems, unmanned aircraft systems are looking for more, they're looking more and more attractive, as we've learned today. Amazon Prime Air is currently investigating the possibility of using small drones to quickly deliver their packages to their customers. My office has met with Amazon Prime Air and learned that they are having some difficulties getting permission from the FAA to test their delivery system outdoors in a rural area in Washington State. Would you please give this subcommittee an update on Amazon Prime Air's petition for an exemption under Section 333 of the FAA Modernization Reform Act of 2012 that will allow them to test this system outside here and in the U.S.?
Yes, sir, I'd be glad to. They have applied for the exemption, and we have worked closely with Amazon. We've been in regular contact with Amazon since, I would say, over a year ago when they began pursuing this project. We believe, though, to some extent, that what they want to be able to do, they can do under with a research certification for the vehicle, and we're also working with them on taking that approach because we think that will fit their needs better. We and they are having those conversations. We know they are not satisfied that they have to go that path, and but I'm certain that we'll reach some conclusions shortly so that we and they can figure out exactly how to support what it is they're trying to do.
Thank you. My second question would be also to you, Ms. Gilligan. Looking to the future, do you see a time when the FAA will have an assistant administrator for unmanned aircraft systems? And if not, why? And if so, what do you think the FAA is doing to prepare for this change?
We believe that unmanned systems are actually like many other of the technologies that we've brought into the system over the years, and so we do believe that there will be full integration and that will be handled within the structure that we currently have. We do not see a need at this point for a separate organization because, again, we need to make sure that the aircraft itself and those systems are integrated in both design and manufacture with the aviation system, and that the operations are integrated with the operation of the rest of the aviation system. So that's the approach that we're pursuing.
Thank you. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Okita.
I thank the chair for the indulgence. I'm not on the committee yet, but I appreciate the time to ask some questions. I have 6 pages of notes here, which for me is kind of an all-time record, so I can tell I'm going to hate being on this committee. I thank the witnesses for their testimony. Mr. Roy, let me start with you. If I heard your testimony correctly, it seemed like you were defending the FAA process here and where they're at when you said, look, other countries might be ahead in terms of the regulatory schematic right now, but they're still going to incur the technical difficulties. Did I get that accurately?
That's correct.
Okay. So then those countries must be acting with reckless abandon or something.
No, I don't think that's true. So
if that's not true, then why can't we follow the same path?
So let me draw a distinction between a small number of flights that demonstrate a capability or provide a service, and what is required in order to service all of, say, agriculture in the U.S. So a good example is Japan. So Japan is sort of a high water mark in terms of precision agriculture, in that about somewhere between 30 and 40%, and the numbers are a little unclear, are sprayed using Yamaha RMAX helicopters. It's interesting that one model of aircraft is providing service for about 77% of all the UAV, and it's doing so with about 2,000 aircraft. So that's a very, very small number, and the effort required to actually support that is relatively small. So it's nice that Japan and the other countries have the regulatory infrastructure in place, the permission for testing that allows companies like Airware and others to go and develop their technology. But what's required is another wave of technology to actually scale up to the Amazon Prime Air servicing all of D.C. or the Boston area. And I think that next step is what's going to be required to really grow the markets everywhere.
Okay, thank you. Tangential to that line of questioning, I'd like to ask any of you if you're aware of any actuarial studies that have been done. If we're talking about a risk-based approach, right, and you've all indicated that that's a fine approach, well, insurance companies all day long do studies that analyze this using math, right? So if we're worried about a strike, in an approach corridor around an airport, we could take the number of, let's say, birds that are in a square mile of that airport or some area, and then let's say it's 10,000 or 20,000 or 100,000, whatever it is, and then add the 10 drones that would be in the area potentially at the same time, and see what the increased percentage of risk is. And then we can have a discussion based on science and math and not pictures and beliefs. Because the fact of the matter is, a bird, which does have situational awareness, I completely agree, but it still can be we still can determine what the risk is. Yeah, Captain.
So we have procedures for birds currently. So if there are birds in the area, when you arrive in the terminal area, there's the ATIS system that the controllers are putting bird reports out. Meteorologists are putting that information out. You can see some large flocks of birds on your radars. We have procedures if we were to have a bird strike. So there's all kinds of procedures for dealing with birds. It's not a preferred method to
but not a bird near miss.
Pardon me?
You outlined a procedure for a UAS near miss.
Bird near miss, we have a procedure for that. You report birds in the area because you have another plane coming right behind you. And
you report flocks of birds and that kind of thing on the airport, and if it's in the approach corridor. But there's not the detailed procedure you indicated for a
You
UAS?
There is. If you're going to hit a flock of birds, you're going to maneuver the airplane in a manner.
No, I meant you get down, you call, then you alluded to a prosecution element that was inherent with the laser stuff, which is an intentional act. So, but my question is about the actuary studies. Have there been any actuarial studies?
So,
Dr. Roy?
for the large aircraft, I think that's absolutely the case. For the small aircraft, the DJI vehicles, et cetera, I think the answer is no, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that we don't have good models of we don't have good failure models for a lot of the components, and the second thing is we don't have good models yet for the consequences of failures. So bird strike actually might be one that does exist, but for a lot of the other failure models, I'm reasonably certain they don't exist.
Will they be helpful?
They'd be extremely helpful.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, I'd like to thank all the witnesses for their testimony and in absentia, the other members for their participation in today's program. The subcommittee stands adjourned.